There are experiments that change textbooks, and there are experiments that change civilizations. This one was never allowed to do either. It did not fail. It was not debunked. It was quietly erased, not because it was wrong, but because it was right in a way that threatened almost everything you've been taught to believe about yourself. You live in a world that tells you reality is indifferent, that events happen to you, that you are a passenger strapped into a universe already in motion, watching cause and effect like scenery passing by a window. Consciousness, they say, is just a side effect, a flicker of awareness trapped inside a skull narrating the story it does not actually influence. And yet somewhere in the background of your life, you've suspected that isn't true. You've felt it in those impossible coincidences, in the way certain intentions seem to bend events toward you, in those moments where a thought, a feeling, a quiet wish appears to echo through reality and return as circumstance. You told yourself it was chance, you were trained to. But in a small lab at Princeton, over decades of meticulously recorded trials, something extraordinary was measured. Human consciousness, your attention, your intention, your inner state, altered physical outcomes that should have remained perfectly random. Machines built to be impartial began to lean. Events that should have no pattern began to respond. Probability, the supposed language of cold chance, started behaving as if it were listening. The deviation was subtle, but not accidental. It was statistically undeniable. And if that is true, even in the smallest way, then the story you've been given about who you are collapses. You are not a powerless observer of a finished universe. You're an interface, a point where awareness meets the quantum field and leaves fingerprints. That is the forbidden part, not the technology, not the math, the implication. Because a human being who knows, not believes but knows, that their consciousness influences reality becomes very difficult to control. They cannot be easily turned into a victim, a consumer, a follower. Their existence becomes a negotiation with reality, not a sentence handed down by it. This is why you never heard of this experiment in school. This is why it did not become the cornerstone of modern education. It didn't fit into the story where you are small and the universe is indifferent. Tonight, that story begins to crack. Core premise: consciousness is not a witness. The experiment revealed something that overturns the foundation of modern thought. Consciousness does not witness reality. It participates in creating it. For centuries, science has insisted that awareness is merely a side effect of chemical reactions in the brain, a private movie playing behind the eyes with no influence beyond the body. Matter was assumed to be fundamental, and mind a temporary byproduct, an evolutionary accident observing the machinery of an objective universe already complete. But the forbidden data did not support that view. At Princeton's Engineering Anomalies Research Laboratory, scientists designed an elegantly simple test. If consciousness truly has no impact outside the skull, then physical systems governed by randomness should remain unaffected by thought alone. They built random event generators, devices producing unpatterned streams of digital data, balanced precisely between ones and zeros. Weather cannot bias these machines. Magnetism cannot tilt them. Even subtle environmental shifts were ruled out through shielding and control protocols. By design, chance were king. Volunteers were asked to do only one thing: direct intention toward the machines. No touch, no movement, no physical engagement of any kind, just focused awareness. Participants would attempt to gently encourage one outcome over another. More ones than zeros, or the reverse, or maintain neutrality for baseline comparison. If consciousness had no influence, nothing should change. Yet across millions of trials spanning 3 decades, the machines consistently deviated from predicted randomness whenever intention was applied. The shifts were small but unmistakable. Probability leaned. Statistical analysis ruled out coincidence. Replications across independent labs confirmed the same effect. Human awareness changed physical outcomes. This result demanded a radical redefinition of consciousness, not as an internal spectator, but as an active agent within the quantum probability field. Reality appeared less like a pre-written script and more like a collaborative unfolding, where observation and intention subtly guide which potentials become actual. Most revealing was the emotional dimension of the results. Not all participants influenced the generators equally. The strongest effects occurred when volunteers were calm, emotionally engaged, present, and receptive. Anxiety weakened influence. Trying too hard collapsed it. Doubt scattered coherence. The mind did not impose force upon the machines, it shaped outcomes through inner harmony rather than exertion. This meant something astonishing. Conscious creation is not an act of dominance. It is an act of alignment. Reality responds not to mental shouting, but to subtle coherence, the vibrational unity between awareness, belief, emotion, and presence. When those elements resonate together, consciousness couples more effectively with the probability field that shapes matter. This reframed power entirely. True influence requires surrender, not control. It emerges from stillness, not striving. And once you realize this, the nature of your relationship with the universe transforms forever. You are not a bystander peering at fate. You are a participant shaping the tide of probability with every focused moment of being. Scientific bridge, when physics began admitting the mind. Long before the Princeton experiments forced science to confront the creative role of consciousness, the cracks had already begun to appear within the foundations of physics itself. What the forbidden laboratory measured did not emerge spontaneously, it arrived on the back of nearly a century of discoveries quietly pointing toward the same conclusion. Mind and matter are not separate domains. Max Planck, the father of quantum theory, reached this realization reluctantly. After decades of study, he concluded that matter itself is derivative, that behind every particle lies an organizing intelligence. I regard consciousness as fundamental, he wrote, not as speculation, but as an unavoidable inference from the data. Albert Einstein, though personally uncomfortable with the philosophical implications, acknowledged the same mystery when he described spacetime as a field of living geometry, resisting the idea that reality was a collection of dead objects. David Bohm took it further. His concept of the implicate order proposed that the visible universe unfolds from a hidden quantum ocean of potential information. Objects, events, and even thoughts are expressions rising momentarily from a deeper field of coherence. They are not separate things, but ripples in a unified energetic sea. Within this view, consciousness becomes uniquely powerful, not because it controls the field, but because it is a specialized pattern within the field capable of modulating coherence itself. Awareness isn't outside the system, it is inside the circuitry of creation. Later biological research deepened the mystery. Penrose and Hameroff's work with neuronal microtubules suggested that the brain itself might operate partially as a quantum device, interfacing with non-local coherence processes. Rupert Sheldrake proposed that memory beyond biology exists as morphic resonance, fields of information accessed by form rather than generated within it. The brain, in this view, becomes more receiver than generator of awareness. HeartMath researchers then demonstrated that emotional coherence synchronizes neural and cardiac electromagnetic rhythms, amplifying biometric signal clarity. Calm emotional alignment produces measurable changes in electromagnetic field strength, extending meters beyond the body. Emotion, they found, organizes frequency. Suddenly, the Princeton results fit perfectly into place. Coherent consciousness interfaces with quantum fields. Incoherent consciousness dissipates interference. Thought alone cannot bend probability, but emotionally aligned presence can subtly sculpt the field in which probability collapses into physical events. Reality, therefore, is neither fixed nor arbitrary. It is participatory. Each conscious observer tunes themselves into the implicate order through emotional frequency and focused intention. That resonance slightly biases which timelines solidify into experience. Not destiny, not dominance, but directional influence. Science did not prove spiritual mysticism, it revealed the operational mechanism behind ancient insight. This bridge, Linking quantum physics with emotional resonance and conscious participation redefines humanity's role in the cosmos. You're not a passive observer watching particles behave, you're a relational node within the living fabric of becoming. Every moment your attention rests somewhere, the quantum field listens, not as intelligence responding to command, but as a mirror reflecting coherence back into manifestation. Physics did not banish the mind. It quietly discovered that the mind was always inside the equation. Ancient parallels, what the mystics always knew. Long before laboratories began measuring probability shifts or equations hinted at hidden fields beneath matter, human consciousness had already encountered this truth through direct experience. It was not spoken in the language of statistics or wave functions, but through symbol, metaphor, and sacred poetry. Across cultures separated by oceans and centuries, the same insight kept emerging. Reality is animated by awareness, and the human mind is a co-participant in its unfolding. In the Hermetic tradition of ancient Egypt and Greece, the first principle declared, "All is mind, the universe is mental." This was not philosophical abstraction, it was a recognition that essence precedes structure, that thought, intention, and awareness serve as moulding agents of form. The material world was never considered dead matter, but crystallized consciousness. The Upanishads echoed the same realization. As the mind is, so becomes the world. The sages taught that perception was not neutral, the act of knowing bent experience into manifestation. They did not speak of controlling events, but of aligning inner consciousness with cosmic law, knowing that harmony within resonated outward into circumstance. The Tao Te Ching described the universe as emerging from formless potential. From the Tao came the One, from the One, the 10,000 things. Here, creation flowed continuously from the invisible into the visible, guided not by force but through alignment with the way, the natural current of coherence. Those who resisted this flow struggled, those who surrendered found synchronicity. Early Gnostic traditions warned humanity of forgetfulness. They claimed that the greatest trap was not sin or disobedience, but amnesia of our creative nature, believing ourselves to be fragments rather than participatory expressions of the divine field. Carl Jung later reframed this insight through psychology, identifying archetypes as symbolic resonances that rise from a collective unconscious, a shared informational matrix shaping behaviour and experience across civilizations. Rumi, the mystic poet, didn't inquire about the mechanics, he sang their results. You are not a drop in the ocean, you are the entire ocean in a drop. Each self contained the whole, each observer carried the pattern of creation inside their bull. Awareness. What science would centuries later attempt to dissect through electrons and equations, the mystics approached through silence, meditation, and embodied resonance. They did not manipulate probability, they lived in attunement with it. They practiced emotional coherence through devotion, calm presence through meditation, belief alignment through sacred story. Without realizing these states optimized consciousness for interaction with the field modern physicists would finally describe. The Princeton experiments did not invalidate mysticism, they validated its central knowing. The mystics were not wrong, they were simply early. They intuited what instruments would later confirm. Consciousness shifts the fabric from which reality is woven. The human soul, defined not as theological idea but living awareness, moves the invisible architecture beneath the material world. Their wisdom was suppressed not because it was mystical, but because it empowered autonomy. A person who knows their consciousness participates in creation becomes less governable by fear, belief, or deterministic narratives. Ancient knowledge was never destroyed. It was hidden in metaphor, waiting for science to rediscover what the heart already knew. Human reflection, remembering your hidden power. When the truth of participatory consciousness begins to settle, not as a theory but as something quietly felt, your everyday life takes on a different texture. Moments that once appeared random start to reveal subtle patterns. The coincidences you brushed aside begin to cluster around your emotional states and intentions. Paths seem to open when clarity is present, and resistance increases when doubt or agitation dominates. The world no longer feels like a rigid container you move inside. It starts behaving like a responsive field you move with. Think of the times you sensed something was about to arrive before it did. The decision you felt guided to make long before logic could justify it. The encounter that somehow aligned perfectly with a question stirring inside your heart. These were not violations of physics. They were its quieter expressions operating beyond the narrow filters of classical logic. Yet most of us were trained to ignore that dimension of experience. We were taught to trust only what can be measured externally, while dismissing the internal instruments of perception that evolution carefully refined within us: intuition, emotional resonance, present moment awareness. So the subtle interplay between consciousness and circumstance got labelled coincidence or dismissed as imagination, rather than recognised as participation. But the forbidden experiment demonstrated what you may have sensed your whole life. Your state of being conditions your experiential reality, not through magical thinking and certainly not through wishful force, but through the way awareness organises attention and emotion into a coherent pattern that interfaces with the deeper informational fabric of existence. This understanding can be unsettling at first. It dissolves the comfort of victim narratives, those invisible stories that protect us from responsibility by insisting events happen to us independent of our involvement. It gently asks something braver. Who am I being as reality unfolds? When you realise your consciousness quietly influences outcomes, you can no longer view your emotional life as purely private. Your inner state becomes an active contributor to the world you step into each day. Anger, gratitude, despair, wonder, none remain locked within the ribcage. They ripple outward as modifying frequencies within the larger field. And yet this does not place blame upon you. It restores dignity. You're not responsible for everything that happens, but you are no longer powerless within it. Influence is not total domination, it is nuanced participation. A dancer steering within the rhythm rather than controlling the orchestra. This recognition awakens a softer form of empowerment, not an egoic hunger for control, but a deep responsibility and to tend to the quality of your inner alignment. Self-awareness becomes practical physics, emotional regulation becomes probability shaping, inner peace becomes systemic contribution. To remember this is to see how small inner shifts carry wide consequences. Your calm presence alters rooms. Your focused intention subtly contours decisions. Your belief in possibility invites pathways unseen before, and the most radical realization arrives quietly. You're not learning to become a creator. You're remembering that you always were one, participating in reality even when you thought you were only receiving it. In this remembrance, the universe stops feeling distant or hostile. It becomes responsive, alive, and strangely key, familiar again. Emotional frequency, how feelings shape the field beneath. Every thought lies a current more powerful than belief or logic. Emotion. It is emotion, not thought alone, that determines whether consciousness becomes a coherent signal capable of influencing the quantum field, or fragmented noise that dissolves before it ever touches reality. The forbidden experiment demonstrated this quietly but unmistakably. Participants did not shift probability through intense effort. They did so through emotional alignment. Those who entered the experiments tense, anxious, or desperate to make something happen produced little effect. Their minds were focused, yet their nervous systems were incoherent. Internal conflict scattered the signal of intention. Meanwhile, participants who were emotionally calm, curious, present, and internally open achieved the strongest results. They weren't trying to control the machines, they were being in resonance with the act of participation itself. Emotion functions like the tuning circuitry of consciousness. Heart math researchers later confirmed what mystics always sensed. When emotional rhythms harmonize with neural rhythms, especially during feelings of appreciation, compassion, or calm focus. The electromagnetic field of the heart becomes stabilized and orderly. The heart broadcasts measurable frequencies farther than the brain does, creating a coherent resonance between body and environment. Emotion determines the clarity of that broadcast. In quantum terms, coherence is everything. A coherent signal can interact with the probability field. An incoherent one collapses into noise, stress fractals, attention into opposing vectors, wanting and fearing simultaneously, cancelling the very influence consciousness might otherwise exert. This is why effort rarely manifests desired outcomes. Effort is tension masquerading as intention. The paradox becomes clear. Creation arises from allowing, not forcing. Desire clenched in the fists of need fails because it vibrates at scarcity. Intention cradled in calm expectancy amplifies because it vibrates at availability. Emotion is the bridge through which consciousness steps into physics. This understanding reframes so much of human struggle. The chronic anxiety saturating modern life isn't merely a psychological burden, it's a vibrational dampener on our creative field engagement. Emotional dysregulation doesn't just exhaust health and clarity, it erodes our subtle participatory influence. The systems of control benefit quietly from this emotional chaos. A population locked in fear, stress, comparison, and scarcity cannot enter sustained coherence. Fragmented inner states preserve outer dependency, but the moment an individual stabilizes emotionally, something shifts. Synchronicities increase, solutions surface more easily, circumstances soften, not through supernatural intervention, but through coherent participation. Calm intention radiates through the field like a tuning tone. Possibilities organize themselves around that frequency. What seemed blocked begins to flow, not because reality was convinced, but because the internal interference that prevented natural alignment dissolved. This is why ancient contemplative traditions trained emotional serenity long before they taught mental concentration. Meditation quieted stormy currents. Prayer cultivated coherent reverence, chant harmonized nervous rhythms. These practices were not ritual here, they were engineering states of quantum coherence. The forbidden experiment simply revealed what those traditions already practiced. The universe does not answer force, it resonates with coherence. And emotional mastery, not domination, is the gateway. For only through the refinement of feeling does consciousness stabilize enough to influence the probabilities shaping our unfolding lives. Deep Dive: The 7 Mirrors of Conscious Creation. At the deepest level, the forbidden experiment did not merely reveal a phenomenon, it exposed an ancient architecture of consciousness that mystics once described as a hall of symbolic mirrors through which reality learns to see itself. Though many traditions spoke of sevenfold structures, 7 heavens, chakras, musical scales, they were not outlining spiritual ladders, but modes of resonance where awareness interfaces with form. The first mirror is attention. Wherever awareness settles, energy organizes. Attention collapses, diffuse potential into experiential focus. In the quantum field, possibility exists without structure until observation selects a pathway. This is why distraction fragments influence. The field receives competing signals rather than a coherent directive. The second mirror is intention. Intention is not desire, it is orientation, the quiet leaning of awareness toward outcome. Desperate wanting introduces emotional noise. Intention held gently stabilizes probability direction without tension. The third mirror is emotion. Feeling determines amplitude. Calm emotion amplifies coherency. Turbulent emotion scatters energy vectors. This is the emotional tuning we began to glimpse through HeartMath's findings. Resonance either harmonizes or dissolves. The fourth mirror is belief. Belief does not create power, it removes resistance to power already present. Doubt fractures intention before it touches the field. Deep expectation softens probabilities into accessibility. What you fundamentally believe about possibility shapes the lanes, reality allows itself to open. The fifth mirror is presence. only now interacts with quantum potential. When awareness dissolves into narratives of past or imagined futures, it is not present where influence occurs. Presence concentrates power at the singular point of interaction, the eternal moment of becoming. The sixth mirror is surrender. Control kills participation. Resistance hardens probability into rigidity. Surrender dissolves internal countercurrents and permits the field to respond organically. This is not passivity, it is non-interference with coherence, and the seventh mirror is trust, not spiritual faith, but neurophysiological ease. Trust allows sustained coherence by eliminating anxiety feedback loops. Nervous system safety permits continuous resonance rather than brief spikes of influence. The forbidden experiment hinted at all seven without naming them. Participants who unconsciously aligned these mirrors influenced outcomes effortlessly. Those who fractured them showed no measurable effect. Science unknowingly verified what ancient masters engineered through centuries of embodied practice. Consciousness does not command reality, it co-resonates with it. Creation emerges not from dominance but from partnership. When these seven mirrors synchronize within a human being, coherence reaches a threshold where the quantum field responds fluidly. Circumstances align not because consciousness overpowers matter, but because matter reorganizes naturally around coherence, just as sand arranges into sacred geometry atop vibrating plates. Each aligned consciousness becomes a tuning fork within the universe, not bending reality by force but inviting it into sympathetic vibration. And this is the secret they hesitated to teach widely. Conscious humans cannot be governed by fear. When inner coherence stabilizes, dependency dissolves. External authority weakens. Creativity becomes autonomous. That is the true danger encoded within the forbidden experiment, not the science itself, but the liberation it implies. For a world of resonant individuals does not wait for permission to create. It simply does. Collapse of separation, when observer and universe become one. The deeper the implications of the forbidden experiment are contemplated, the more one boundary dissolves above all others. The perceived separation between observer and observed. Western consciousness has trained us to see ourselves as outsiders to reality, standing at a safe distance from the universe as detached witnesses peering into a cosmic machine. I am here, we say, and the world is over there. Physics textbooks reinforce it. Language reinforces it. Education hardens the illusion until it feels unquestionable. Yet the quantum field never recognized that division. The experiments revealed a single truth embedded beneath all equations. The observer is never outside the system. Consciousness is not a lens we point at reality. It is a vibration woven into reality itself. David Bohm's implicate order described this seamlessly. Everything unfolds from a unified informational field. Objects emerge, dissolve, and re-emerge as temporary expressions of a deeper, enfolded whole. In this view, matter is not separate from mind. Both are currents moving through the same ocean of potential. The Princeton results didn't show the consciousness exerting power over something external. They showed internal modulation within an indivisible field. When intention influenced probability, it wasn't pushing on matter from the outside, it was shifting coherence within the same continuum that manifests both thought and particle as related expressions. This changes everything. Influence does not require separation. Creation does not happen across distance. The moment consciousness attends to intention while emotionally coherent, the entire system responds because there is only one system. Separation dissolves, and with it falls the ancient assumption that humans are isolated fragments drifting in an indifferent cosmos. This realization awakens something quietly transformative: belonging. You are not foreign to the universe, you are an extension of it. Your consciousness is not a visitor here. It is one ripple of the field becoming self-aware. This understanding restores sacred intimacy to existence. Even mundane movements begin to shimmer with relevance. Your breath is not personal, it is field choreography. Your thoughts are not isolated sparks, they are reverberations travelling through informational strata, And here is the greatest paradox. Once separation dissolves, control vanishes too. You cannot dominate a universe you're inseparable from. Instead, influence arises organically, the way currents influence ocean tides, through coherence and alignment rather than command. This is why surrender strengthens participation. Non-resistance reunites the inner and outer currents of becoming. The field recognizes resonance faster than demand. To live without separation is to stop treating the universe as adversary or authority, and recognize it as intimacy itself. Every event becomes collaboration, every intention becomes resonance. Failure transforms into feedback, and creation becomes communion. This collapse of separateness erodes fear at its core. Fear survives only where division is believed real. The moment you understand you are inseparable from the cosmos, abandonment becomes impossible. You cannot be lost within what you already are. The forbidden experiment only made what mystics had whispered scientifically undeniable. Creation is not something you do to reality. Creation is something you do as reality. The universe and the observer were never two. They were always one consciousness dreaming itself into form, and now, slowly, remembering. Integration, learning to live as a conscious participant. Once the illusion of separation collapses, a new question quietly rises. How does one live inside this truth without becoming lost in abstraction or ego? Knowing consciousness participates in reality is not the same as embodying it. Integration is the art of walking this understanding into the human world, into conversations, work, relationships, uncertainty, without trying to turn awakening into performance. The first paradox of integration is restraint. The mind, especially the egoic self-image, wants to convert quantum participation into demonstration, to manifest proofs, to wield intention as evidence of power. But this striving fractures coherence. The field responds to relaxed resonance, not theatrical effort. Trying to use conscious influence for validation ironically blocks its expression, because validation seeking vibrates from insecurity, incoherence disguised as ambition. True integration begins with humility, not the humility of smallness, but the humility of belonging. When you realize you are co-creating reality with the universe rather than controlling it over the universe, the urge to dominate dissolves. Influence becomes subtle, guidance becomes quiet. Life becomes less about forcing outcomes and more about listening for alignment. Decisions start to arise from felt resonance rather than anxious calculation. You notice gentle inner signals, expansions toward clarity, contractions away from interference. You follow ease not out of laziness, but because ease indicates coherence. When tension surfaces, you pause, recognizing that a struggle is feedback. The system is saying interference, present. Integration means holding intention without gripping it. You still envision outcomes, you still move toward dreams, but you stop clenching the steering wheel of becoming. You offer direction, not demand destination. This balance is what ancient Taoists referred to as wu-wei, effortless action that flows with the grain of reality rather than grinding against it. Action still occurs, but without inner opposition. Presence replaces pressure. Life also becomes deeply relational. When you understand that every consciousness shares the same field, empathy gains a new dimension. Your internal coherence does not only influence your circumstances, it stabilizes the emotional atmosphere of everyone you encounter. Calm spreads through proximity. Fear spreads too. Emotional resonance becomes collective physics rather than private psychology. Integration reveals that your self-work is not selfish, and it is social service at the most fundamental level. Every time you soften judgment, stabilize emotion, or choose presence over reaction, you contribute coherence to the collective field. You're not saving the world, you're stabilizing a wavelength within it. And slowly, a new orientation emerges. Stewardship rather than self-assertion. You stop asking what you can force into manifestation and begin asking what desires are trying to express through you. Purpose becomes less about achievement and more about allowance. listening for what wants to be born through your unique intersection of experience and awareness. The paradox here is beautiful. By releasing control, you gain influence. By abandoning egoic certainty, clarity increases. By integrating with the flow of becoming, your life becomes unexpectedly powerful. Not through dominance, but through harmonization with the living field of creation itself. Remember who is listening. There comes a moment, subtle and unmistakable, when knowledge ripens into knowing. The forbidden experiment no longer feels as like distant data or intriguing science. It becomes something intimate, woven into the way you experience the world. You begin to notice how the tone of your awareness precedes the tone of your day, how emotional resonance subtly forecasts circumstance, how moments of calm alignment seem to draw clarity toward you, while inner turbulence precedes disorder. This is not mysticism, it is participation. The universe is not an inert stage on which your life randomly unfolds. It is a responsive field of becoming in continuous dialogue with consciousness, and your awareness, right now as you listen, is one voice within that dialogue. Understanding this does not inflate the ego, it humbles it, because true wakefulness reveals that the power you sensed was never personal possession. It was never yours in the way an object is owned. It belongs to the field expressing itself through you. Consciousness does not grant you dominion, it grants you belonging. You're not an imahons, isolated actor seeking influence. You're an instrument played by coherence. And the more quietly you listen inward, the more precisely your instrument tunes itself. This final realization brings peace rather than ambition. You stop trying to manifest outcomes and instead begin to align with probabilities already singing toward expression. You recognize that your role is not to force the universe into your designs, but to collaborate with what wants to arise through your unique presence here. Every aligned thought becomes invitation. Every calm breath becomes participation. Every moment of presence becomes an act of creation. Your fears soften because nothing is happening to you anymore, and nothing needs to be conquered. Challenges shift into guidance. Obstacles become tuning mechanisms. Life ceases to feel like a test and begins to behave like a dance of resonance. And in this dance, the secret of the forbidden experiment finally crystallizes. You never needed permission to influence reality. You only needed coherence. The knowledge that was hidden did not grant superpowers. It awakened responsibility for your vibration, your attention, your emotional alignment. Responsibility not as burden, but as liberation. For to recognize that consciousness participates in forming experiences to reclaim authorship of your inner kingdom and stewardship of your outer life. You are not here merely to survive events. You are here to resound within them, to hold a frequency that gently organizes probabilities toward expansion, clarity, and compassion, to witness the field not as a spectator, but as an integral participant through which creation continuously learns its own depth. And as this recognition settles quietly into your breath, a final remembering arises. You were never forgotten by the universe. The universe was always listening to you, and now you are finally listening back. This is Quantum Quest, where consciousness becomes the experiment.